Howdy, folks. My name's DC. I use they or he pronouns. I'm an attorney with the ACLU of Kansas, and we're here to provide, in partnership with KU's and Douglas County Legal Aid and KU's Trans Law Students Association, a Kansas name change and federal gender marker change clinic tonight. So how we're going to go about things this evening is the first 45 minutes of the event will be sort of a traditional Know Your Rights presentation where I walk through the current state of play for Kansas name changes and gender marker changes, and also talk about the federal options for gender markers that are affirming on IDs. And then the second half of the event, I will stay in the main room with y'all, and we'll have kind of a big Q&A about, what I went over in the presentation, general questions about policy. At the same time, we will have a number of breakout rooms going on with attorneys or law student volunteers from KU who will be able to go through some questions that you have about your name change process or gender marker change process. And so with that, I will go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started with the first part of the event, which will be the presentation. While I'm sharing my screen, if folks have any questions or concerns before we get going, feel free to come off mute or throw them in the chat. So the first half of this presentation, we're going to talk about Kansas policies around Kansas name changes and gender marker changes on Kansas identity documents. There has been, I think, a lot of confusion and some disinformation in this moment in Kansas after last year and SB 180 passing and what that meant for Kansas policies. So we want to be sharing, where we're currently at in Kansas in this moment. So first, I want to make clear that name changes are still allowed in Kansas. The laws that were passed last session did not impact name change policy in Kansas. So currently in Kansas, trans adults and trans minors are able to receive name changes. These name changes are a legal process, meaning they require you to use the court system. So gender marker changes have traditionally been administrative, which just means you could file something with an agency and get your gender marker changed. But the name change is a court process where you have to get a court order from a judge. So you can do your name change, one of two ways. You can do that through representation by counsel, by an attorney that will go to your name change hearing and handle the process on your behalf, or you can do it what's called pro se, which just means representing yourself. You don't have to have an attorney represent you, or if you're doing this for a minor, you don't have to have an attorney. You can do this pro se. You just need to make sure you have the right paperwork and filings. Let's see. And I should say, if folks have questions, we're going to have Q&A for folks that joined late, a Q&A specifically at the end of the presentation. So just flagging that. Alrighty. So to receive a name change in Kansas, there are certain requirements. And I want to note, I know that we can't all memorize what I'm going to share on the screen right now and know what to do based off of that. I'm just kind of giving an overview of the process for a name change and what's required. We're going to share really in-depth resources. We'll share links after in the emails that y'all gave us, everything that we're talking about today. So you'll have physical copies of all this stuff as well. But for a name change, the general things that you need to do in Kansas are, first, be a Kansas resident. So you have to have lived in the state for a certain amount of time to be qualified as a Kansas resident. And then you have to file with the district court clerk, wherever you are in Kansas, a few things. There'll be a cover sheet. There'll be a petition for your name change that will need to be signed and notarized. And then there will also be either a filing fee that you pay when you're submitting those things to the court, or there's an option to do what's called a filing fee waiver, to waive the cost of filing if you're eligible. So you'll have to submit these things to the district court clerk, and then you will get a court hearing. And at that court hearing, you will need to bring proof of notice, whatever notice is required in your area or by the judge that's doing your name change. That could look like a number of things. It could be as onerous as requiring publication in your local newspaper for a certain amount of time, or it could be something as small as sending mail out to your own creditors alerting the name change. So there's varying requirements, and some judges will change what they will do. So you'll need to look into that for your specific area. And then you'll also need to bring the name change order for the judge to sign at your court hearing. And then after your hearing's done, your order will be signed and you will have your official court-ordered legal name change. And then, of course, after you get that name change, it doesn't automatically go change every other, identity document in your life, but you do have the court order that you can take to use to change your name on other things like your bank account information or at your job or things like that. So that is name changes in Kansas. Now let's switch and talk about gender markers in Kansas. So this is the area that has been impacted by last year's law that was passed, and the Attorney General's interpretation of that law since that law's been in effect. So first, let's talk about birth certificates in Kansas. As of September 2023, the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, which is the state agency that issues birth certificates, formally changed its policy to no longer allow gender marker changes on Kansas birth certificates. So what that means, today is that if you have not yet amended the gender marker on your birth certificate and you were born in Kansas, you are not able to amend that gender marker currently under the policy that's in place. But if you were born in Kansas and you already amended the gender marker on your birth certificate, that birth certificate is still valid. The law and the Attorney General's lawsuits that's been going on has not impacted the validity of birth certificates that were already amended. But there's a big but here. If you, while the current policy is in place, if you apply for another copy of your birth certificate, like a certified copy, or if you have to amend your birth certificate again in the future, like you've already changed the gender marker, but you haven't changed your name on your birth certificate. If you amend your birth certificate again, apply for a new copy, when KDHE issues your new birth certificate, they will revert the gender marker that you changed back to the old gender marker. That reversion policy is unfortunately a part of the new policy that KDHE has in place. So if you've already amended your birth certificate, it's good, it's valid, make copies of it, laminate it, hold on to it. Because if you need, another copy because you lost it, or if you have to amend it again in the future, you will unfortunately lose that gender marker that you've already amended. So that is Kansas birth certificates. These are run by the KDHE, like I said. Now we're going to talk about driver's licenses. Driver's licenses are run by a different state agency, and they have a different policy. So KDOR, the Kansas Department of Revenue, runs all of the state's DMVs. And so they are in charge of issuing driver's licenses in Kansas. So when KDHE changed their policy to stop issuing birth certificate gender marker changes, KDOR chose to not change its policy. So KDOR still has a policy that, allows for gender marker changes on driver's licenses. However, the Attorney General, because KDOR did not change its policy, the Attorney General sued KDOR to essentially force KDOR to stop allowing gender marker changes on driver's licenses in Kansas. And so that lawsuit's ongoing. Last summer in July, the district court judge on that case issued what's called a temporary restraining order. And that order bans KDOR from changing gender markers on driver's licenses while this order is in place. And that lawsuit is ongoing. The ACLU of Kansas intervened in that lawsuit between the Attorney General and KDOR on behalf of 4 transgender Kansans to assert trans Kansans' constitutional rights to bodily autonomy and privacy, and their equal protection rights. And so we did not get a favorable ruling from the district court in that case, but we have already filed our appeal of that decision to the appellate courts in Kansas, and that is sort of playing out right now. But let's remove from all of the legal back and forth at this moment. Let's talk about what that means for the driver's license policy in Kansas as it stands right now. So even though we're appealing this lawsuit and it's ongoing, the judge's order banning gender marker changes on driver's licenses is still in place. And so it works sort of similarly to the KDHE birth certificate policy, in that if you have not yet amended the gender marker on your Kansas driver's license, you will not be able to do so while this order is in place from the judge. If you have already amended a gender marker on your driver's license, that driver's license is still valid. But if your license expires while this order is in place, when the DMV issues your new license, they will likely revert your gender marker back to the old marker. The same thing if you amend your license for any reason, apply for a new license to get a real ID, for example, or to change your address or to change your name, the DMV may likely revert your gender marker back to the old marker when they make those changes on your license while this order is in place. So that is birth certificates and driver's licenses. And sorry, I just saw a question in the chat. When I'm saying to the revert it back to the old marker, I mean the original marker. Under the policy of KDHE or under the order from the judge for KDOR, the reversion policy means they would revert it back to whatever the original marker was on your birth certificate or the original marker on your driver's license. Thanks for that question. So that is where we're at with driver's licenses. Again, the ACLU is currently appealing in a lawsuit about this specific issue. We will be posting, on our channels updates about the timeline for the appeal and any updates we have, around that case. But that is where things stand for driver's licenses. So we're going to be talking, about name changes and identity document changes. And just because we are in this moment in Kansas with these changing policies, I want to make sure that we took a moment to pause and talk this through for folks, because there's some folks, that may have already got one thing changed, but not the other. And just important to be thinking these things through when we're making these decisions about our legal transition. So one thing I want to make clear is if you have already amended a gender marker on your Kansas birth certificate, you want to make, and you haven't changed your name, and you're here to think about getting your legal name change, you can, get a name change order and not effectuate that on your birth certificate. The same thing with a driver's license. You can get a legal name change order and not effectuate that on your license right away. So there's decisions that folks want to be making about the importance of maintaining a gender marker that affirms them if they've already changed their gender marker, versus the importance of having a new legal name on certain documentation. And And that is a personal decision that people need to make individually. The importance of maintaining a gender marker versus a name, or vice versa. Unfortunately, Kansas has put us in this position to be weighing these decisions. I know that's not things that we want to be doing, but I just want to make sure that we name that while we're thinking about this process for ourselves. But the silver lining I want to share is that if you have not yet changed the gender marker on any of your Kansas documentation, you still have a federal option to get an affirming gender marker. So say you haven't changed your birth certificate or your license, and you were born in Kansas, so you're not able to change those things. You can seek what's called a federal passport card, and get an affirming gender marker on that. And so I want to transition and talk a little bit about our options for affirming ID at the federal level, because Kansas has taken some of those options away. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what these federal affirming ID options are. I think most folks, some folks have heard of passport booklets. People are familiar with, at least maybe from like media they've engaged with, a passport booklet that you use for international travel. You get stamped when you go through customs, that type of thing. But there's also something called a federal passport card, which is, it looks just like a driver's license. It's the size of a credit card and it would fit in your wallet. And you can use it for a lot of things that you use a driver's license for, as far as identifying yourself. We're wanting to talk about passport cards and booklets because the federal level, you can choose an M, an F, or an X gender marker on your passport, and they do not require a proof of gender. So you don't have to have a doctor's note or some sort of social service provider attest to your gender. And importantly for us in Kansas, you don't have to have a state ID that verifies your gender marker. So even if you have no state identification that shows an M gender marker, but you want an M marker on your federal passport, you can just select it, and that's what you'll get on your passport. So, while you can't use federal IDs to replace a birth certificate or a license, you can, use it in a lot of the same ways as you use those documents, because a passport counts as real ID. For a lot of things, like voting, for instance. So this is, an option that we're uplifting for folks sort of as harm reduction in this moment where Kansas has taken away our ability to amend the gender marker on our state licenses or birth certificates. So what is a passport card? Like I said, it's just a little card. It looks just like a license, essentially. It's real ID compliant, so you can use it, for domestic air travel, just like when you use your license to fly, or for certain entry at ports in the U.S. And it's essentially, an alternative to a state ID. You can't use it as a driver's license. If you get pulled over, you do have to have a license to provide an officer. But you can use it for a lot of other reasons, for employment, for voting, for identification and tax purposes. You can use a passport to verify your identity. And so it's really useful also because you can just put it in your wallet, so then in the daily times that we're showing our driver's license that may be outing us, if you're able to get a passport card, you can use that and have a marker that won't out you. So who is eligible for federal passports? It's, similar to a passport booklet. So if you are a U.S. citizen by birth or naturalization, or if you're a qualifying U.S. non-citizen national, you can apply for a passport card. There is also no age limit on passport cards, but if you are under 16, then your parent or guardian has to participate in the application process with you. How much do these cost? This is something that, unfortunately, federal ID is significantly more expensive than state ID. It's like $25 to renew your license. But in total, if you haven't already got a passport, to apply for the first time, It's likely about $80 if you're over 16 or about $65 if you're under 16. You will have to take a photo for your passport card that you submit with it, and these costs incorporate the cost of the photo. I will note that the U.S. Department of State webpage has some more specific info about the cost and application process for the passport card. And then I'll also flag at the end of the presentation, there's some community resources that we've created to help assist the community with the cost of a federal passport card, because we know, the cost is likely prohibitive to members of our community. And so we've got some ways to assist with that as well. So one thing I want to mention is that, I said it's good that the federal option allows us not only to self-attest to our gender, but also you can choose an F, an M, or an X gender marker. So you have a gender neutral option. But it's important to note, because this is a new option, we haven't always had X gender markers available. Just to think critically about, your choice to select an X gender marker. There are a few safety concerns that you want to have in mind. One is just if you're planning to travel with your passport card, doing international travel, or if you're getting a passport booklet, for example, and traveling out of the state or out of the country, you want to be aware of the safety issues that can arise when traveling with an X gender marker, because in a lot of instances, because an X isn't a binary marker, it will out you as either trans or flag you sort of as different than the usual IDs that go through customs in some countries. And so it's important to be thinking about, where you're traveling and the safety level for queer and trans folks in that country. And then additionally, just in the United States, if you want to get an X on a passport card and you're just going to be using it, to go do things that you have to be ID'd for within the US, the travel concerns don't exist, but that same context of an X gender marker not being a binary marker kind of flagging you as different. For some folks, it's more important that they are able to have an X marker that affirms their gender identity on their card. And for some folks, they want to feel more safe and will select, the most affirming binary gender marker option, so that they can feel more comfortable or live more stealth. And so, again, these are just individual personal decisions for each person to make in their legal transition journey, but things that I want to make sure that folks are thinking about when we're talking about them. So that is X gender markers. Another thing I want to talk about, because we hear this question a lot, is what happens if I do apply for a passport card, but then that passport ID has a gender marker that none of my other identity documents have. So you get, say you wanted a male gender marker on your passport, but your birth certificate, your driver's license say F. There is nothing legally wrong with having, mismatching gender markers on your identity documents. That there's no crime, there's no civil penalty for having mismatching markers. But it can cause just some practical issues. One is if you're in a situation where you have to provide two forms of ID, onboarding at a job, if you have to provide your birth certificate and your passport card, and those have mismatching gender markers, sometimes that can potentially out you to the potential employer, or just cause, other interpersonal issues to be aware of. And so it's one of those things where nothing legally is wrong with that, with having mismatching markers, and you can present those documents. They're still valid even if they're mismatching. But just know that sometimes it can cause issues, or individuals are confused about why the markers are mismatching. So you might have to talk to the administrative assistant about that issue. All right. So that is where we're at with the options federally. You can apply, and I do want to name, I think I'll have some slides in here on for resources for applying. we have some really robust guides, just like with the name change resources I was mentioning. We have robust guides for applying for a federal passport card, and we will send those links out after to everyone that's in attendance as well. So you don't have to remember everything I'm saying on those slides either. So first resources I wanted to uplift is Kansas name change resources. And if you remember back when we were talking about name changes, I said there's two ways that you can go about getting your court order. You can either represent yourself pro se in court and file in court by yourself, or you can have attorney representation. And so I wanted to uplift the resources that exist for both of those avenues. If you want to file pro se, Kansas Legal Services has some really robust pro se name change resources on their website that we'll also send around to everybody. One of those is the guide for adult name changes, and the other is a guide for minor name changes. But both of those are guides for if you're doing this on your own. KLS's website also has links to all of the forms that we were talking about that you'll need to submit, or directions on where you need to go to print those forms off. So that's a great resource if you're looking at doing it on your own. If you want to have attorney representation, then I have some other resources listed on this side of the slide here. One of those is our friends that are here with us tonight, KU Law's Legal Aid Clinic, also known as the Douglas County Legal Aid Society. They have a clinic that is able to assist with Kansas name changes in the Douglas County area. And the telephone number that's listed on the screen there is how you can call to do an intake with the clinic. And we will send, again, all these resources on this slide out after the presentation. Then I want to flag Mocan Queer Law. This is a small law firm that's technically housed in Missouri, but it's run by two trans attorneys who do work on Kansas and Missouri side, and they do name change work on Kansas and Missouri side as well. They are sliding scale, so it's not a guarantee that it's free services, but they do try to adjust their pricing to accommodate most of the community. So there are websites on the slide, and they also have an Instagram that they're really active on as well. And then finally, I want to flag Shook, Hardy, and Bacon. It's a law firm that's in Kansas City. They have an affirmation project where they do gender marker and name change work on the Missouri and Kansas side as well. And their email is listed on the screen there, affirmation@shb.com. You can reach out to that email for their resources as well. So those are the name change resources in Kansas. Now let's talk about applying for a federal passport card. So the good news is, it's never fun to do government administrative hurdles, but the good news is the federal application process is pretty seamless. It's online, so if you have access to computer, you can apply fairly easily. So I have the link for the application, but I also want to note that on the ACLU of Kansas's website, linked here on the step-by-step guide bullet, we have a really robust guide that walks you through the online application process for your passport card. And we'll send that out to folks as well. But just some general things to know. You'll have to provide a significant amount of background information. It's the government. They like to know all of the things. You'll also need to provide a birth certificate or driver's license, some form of verifying your identity. So you'll need to have those documents ready. They just don't have to have the gender marker that you want. You just need to have them to verify your identity. And then also, if you're doing this on your own, you'll need to have access to a printer and ability to make copies of your ID documents that you're using for your application. So I just wanted to flag that. You'll also need to schedule a photo, which we'll share. Our resource on the ACLU page has lots of options for you to get your photo taken. You can do them at the Postal Service. Oftentimes you can use local libraries. There's lots of resources to get your photo ID. And then as promised, Oh, sorry. Yeah, all the resources I'm talking about, I'm just addressing the chat, will be shared with everyone. And basically, every link in the PowerPoint you see will also be sent in an email after the event today. All right. Last slide. Lots of talking from me. Sorry, folks. So Federal ID Card Community Fund. As I mentioned, the federal IDs are more expensive than state IDs, and that means they're more inaccessible to our community. And so the Kansas City Center of Inclusion has partnered with the ACLU to run a community fund to help pay for federal IDs for trans folks that don't have gender affirming state IDs. And so there's an application fund that you can apply for. I'll share the link with everyone after the presentation. It's also on KCCI's website, which is listed on the slide as well. And so you can just fill that out to apply for assistance. And then also, if folks know of individuals that want to support that type of community fund, we're currently still raising money for that fund, and we have the donation link there as well. So that is, I think, there we go. Yeah, the end of my presentation.